Thank you very much, Dr. Naik.
Thank you, ma'am.
Well, I must really thank Professor Mary Mohanty for having invited me. And well, this was absolute short notice, but since environmentalism is something very close to my heart, and it was Puri College calling, and Puri is my native place. I'm a daughter of the soil. How could I say no to the call of the soil? So, and especially this seminar, this webinar is very, very relevant in the wake of the Cyclone Fani, which happened last year. You know, when my own village, which is in Shaki Gopal in Puri, and my ancestral, my grandmother's place, which is near Chandanpur, all these places are devastated. And my Lord Jagannath, the epitome of environmentalism, who is made of wood, and he is a human, like, I mean, you know, his sister and his brother, they are a connection between the human and nature, or they are a connection, they connect, because all the rituals that we have there, and especially when we have an incarnation of the Lord is made of tree, of wood. So unless we get a particular kind of wood which is safe, which is protected, we cannot have the Lord, we cannot have Jagannath, and our religious sentiments would be hurt. Well, now moving away from religion, now I would thank S.C.S. College, the principal, the staff, and all concerned in organizing this wonderful webinar. My heartfelt gratitude. And with this, I would like to begin my talk without much ado. Literature, culture, and environment, as you said. So I'm just going to, because, you know, this is a huge topic, and I'm just going to throw some sprinkles here and there, just to provoke the listeners to read more, to research more, to know more, right? So this, I hope, will be a evocative and provocative talk. So I would like to share my screen. I would like to show some PowerPoint, if that is allowed. Can I?
You can, ma'am. No problem.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Am I audible? Because I cannot see myself.
Ma'am, you are very much audible. You can proceed.
Audible and visible.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because I'm not visible to myself. My screen is visible to me. This is what happens with Google Meet. Anyway, thank you very much. So with this, let's start the seminar or the talk. So, you see, across disciplines, people are plagued with earth-centered questions. Now, especially in the wake of rapid industrialization and a mad race for technological development, our world is in the throes of a crisis resulting from environmental destruction. So literature and literary criticism are sensitive to the looming reality and are hounded by questions like, what bearing signs? So, you know, there are many questions that have been hounding us, and we can see certain questions here, which are, what bearing signs of ecology could have on literary analysis? How related disciplines like history, philosophy, psychology, anthropology, etc. facilitate a relationship between literary studies and environmental discourse? Then, some broad spectrum questions addressed by environmentalism, founded on the premise that human culture is connected to the physical world, affects it, and is affected by it. And these broad spectrum questions are the ways in which the environmental crisis is seeping into contemporary literature and popular culture, and to what extent or to what effect the environmental crisis is seeping into contemporary, well, I think that's the repetition, sorry for that. Well, then these are founded on the premise that human culture is connected to the physical world and affects it and is affected by it in turn. Now, let's come to Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature. Here he writes, melodious poets shall be hoarse as street ballads when once the penetrating keynote of nature and spirit is sounded. The earthbeat, seabeat, heartbeat, which makes the tune to which the sun rolls, and the globule of blood and the sap of trees. So what does Emerson do here? Emerson privileges nature over the human, saying that the human voice would sound hoarse if pitted against the sounds of nature, like the sounds of the sea, the earth, and even the heart, which dictate the rhythmic motion of the sun, the sap or life juice of the trees, and the bloodstream in the human body. So, the beating of the heart cannot be controlled by humans. It is something that nature has gifted human beings. The moment that rhythm is stopped, that beautiful music of the heart is stopped, the human ceases to exist. So he says that the poets would be sounding like hoarse street ballads which are tuneless, right? If we listen to them vis-a-vis the beautiful sea sound, that is the sound of the waves, the sound of the wind over the sea, the earth beat. What is the earth beat? The sound of the trees, the sound of the rivers, the sound that are all around us, the sound of the insects, the sound of the birds, all these things to which the sun rolls, the sun comes in the morning and goes back in the evening, and even the globule of the blood and the sap of the trees. This is what Emerson tells us. And now, ecocriticism as a theory expands the notion of the world and moves away from this restrictive social sphere to include the entire ecosphere, just like Emerson has told us in the quotation that I took from Nature. So, what literature or ecocriticism now encompasses negotiating between the human and the non-human world. It ensures that literature must not be seen as something floating above the material world in abstractions, but rather as an integral part of an immensely complex ecosystem. So these we can see from the lines of Emerson and many other great poets and writers, right? And, during the industrial era, or even in the Victorian era and post-Victorian in the war times, humans moved away from nature. It is that time that we had a dissociation. Literature was dissociated from nature. But eco-critics believe that literature cannot float in some kind of material world in abstractions. We cannot only live in abstractions. We have to think about reality, because what is literature but a reflection of life? Now, one of the main goals of environmentalism or ecocriticism is how to study, how individuals in society behave with nature and other ecological aspects. In this concern, we can cite Simon C. Esther from his notes in 2001 in a report card on ecocriticism, where he says that ecocriticism has distinguished itself, debates notwithstanding, firstly by the ethical standards it takes, its commitment to the natural world as an important thing, rather than simply as an object of thematic study, and secondly, by its commitment to making connections, right? We need to make connections, and Estop has rightly told us that we need to make connections between the human and the non-human. Therefore, ecocriticism is widely recognized as a field of inquiry, and that promotes works of art that raise moral questions about human interaction with nature, while motivating audiences to live a limit with respect to nature that will be binding over generations. Now let's come to Ursula Heise. Ursula Heise, and a distinguished eco-critic, explains, I quote, "Since the advent of deconstruction, new historicism, and cultural studies, literary critics have justifiably wary of drawing precise boundaries between such concepts as nature and culture that seem to exclude each other, but turn out upon closer analysis to be entangled with each other in multiple ways, whether these entanglements be semantic, historical, or power political. These entanglements could be in the meaning, in the history, or in the past, in the present, or in how power politics operates. But we cannot write away the question of nature and culture. So we can say that Western society's fixation with nature as a wild space is no longer viable. As human presence has spread to almost every natural space, this in turn has also problematized the binary of nature culture, as these are too intertwined to possibly separate. In trying to find answers to some of the questions that arise in relation to nature, scholars turn to ecocritical theories. Ecocriticism involves not only looking at representations of nature in literature, but I quote from Rebecca Douglas, who says that it is a reading with attention to the treatments of nature, land, and place, informed by a desire to understand past and present connections between literature and human attitudes regarding the earth. This also takes us back to Heise's statement about something to do with the historicality. Okay, she says that the entanglements have to be semantic, historical, or power political. So Rebecca Douglas just reinforces that. Writing about, now let's come to Wordsworth, our favorite nature writer. Now, this romantic writer, writing about the river that flowed behind his father's house, he says in the prelude, or he recognized the role of nature in shaping his own personality. We read that, "I heard among the solitary hills low breathings coming after me and sounds of undistinguishable motion, steps almost as silent as the turf they trod." He acknowledges that, okay, fair seed time had my soul, and I grew up fostered alike by beauty and by fear. He says, "I believe that nature oftentimes, when she would frame a favored being from his earliest dawn of infancy, doth open out the clouds, as at the touch of lightning, seeking him with gentlest visitation, not the less, though haply aiming at the selfsame end. Does it delight her sometimes to employ severer interventions? Ministry more palpable, and so she dealt with me." So here, the river is his playmate, with whom he spends long summer days in harmony, companionship, and bliss. Nature nurtures his soul while chastising him for the wrongs he does. So we read here that, "Does it delight her, her is nature, sometimes to employ severer interventions, ministry more palpable, and so she dealt with me." So For example, one evening when he steals a bird and runs down the slopes of the hill, he feels as if someone has witnessed this crime and is actually pursuing him. So here we read, I hear among the solitary hills low breathings come after me and sounds of undistinguishable motion, steps almost as silent as the turf betrothed. So silently, nature is chastising him, and he acknowledges that fair seed time had my soul, that he has grown up, fostered alike by beauty and fear. So there is an interconnectedness. He is not only enamored by the beauty of nature, he is not only using nature as a plaything or something that is apart from him and he goes there and he enjoys himself, but nature is also a guardian. Nature is also somebody who is shaping him, and so he's fostered by fear as well, fear of nature. So this here nature is not treated as something which is passive, but nature is active. Wordsworth poetry is characterized by a highly active nature, rather than the passive version that generally signals inferiority in literary and other contexts. Generally, we see in most literature that nature is passive. People go to nature and they enjoy themselves and they come back. Nature has no role in that. Although there is a deviation in Eastern literature, rather Oriental literature or Hindu literature, where you find the direct communion or interaction of the human being with nature. I was reading Gita Govindam, and there I found how Krishna and Radha are in the grove, and all the trees, the river, they all, they conspire to make these couple meet. So the clouds conspire, the trees conspire, so they get some kind of an active role rather than the passive portrayal that we find in all Western literature. So in this context, I cite Stacy Alaimo, and she observes, nature has been appraised as a repository of stasis and essentialism in situations where human domination is validated. So where human domination is validated, nature has been apprised as a repository of stasis and essentialism. In contrast, activity is a vehicle for foregrounding nature. Barring a few romantic poets, most writers privilege the human over nature and believe in the Western cultural concept that nature is to serve the human desires The outer world and the textual world are inextricably connected. Literature reflects the natural world of its time period through the author's depiction of the environment, mostly as nature, presupposing a distinction between culture and nature. It is upon this premise that I steer towards ecofeminism. Now, ecofeminism, also called ecological feminism, is an offspring of the second wave of feminism that began in the 1960s. Ecofeminism has many variations. The disparate approaches associated with the term have traditionally adhered to the belief that nature and women experience an oppression, connecting the two entities in significant ways. As Miller observes, ecofeminism links nature and humanity within an interconnected and interdependent whole. Now, ecofeminism rejects, ecofeminism rejects a philosophy of domination that privileges human desire over the natural world. With the rise of Western civilization based on industrialism, remarks Ienestrucking, I quote, nature becomes something to be dominated overcome, and made to serve the needs of men, thereby reduced to natural resources to be exploited. As part of this cultural devaluation, nature became other and destined to be objectified and subordinated. Additionally, to be defined as nature. So, here also we can cite Val Plumwood, the Australian eco-critic or eco-feminist, who says that to be defined as nature is to be defined as passive, as non-agent and non-subject. Ecofeminism projects an embodied spirituality that departs from traditional Christian perceptions of a disembodied, detached divinity. The Christian monarchical model, comments McFagg, poses danger, for it encourages a sense of distance from the world. It is concerned only with human beings and supports attitudes of either domination of the world or passivity towards it. So in Christian theology, there is a monarchical model where only humans are important and nature is only remembered so far as it is of use to the human beings, right? So, either human beings are dominating, they are cutting trees to build houses. How useful is nature? So the world is passive towards the existence of nature. Now, Martha Hampton, in her essay, Four Waves of Feminism, notes that this fourth wave of feminism, which came after the 1960s towards 1980s, was complex, diverse, and inclusive of ideas. It believed in developing women-only spaces. We can just have this here. Okay. So it believed in having women-only spaces, and I quote from Martha Hampton that the notion that women working together create a special dynamic that is not possible in mixed groups, which would ultimately work for the betterment of the entire planet. She further says that women, owing to their long subjugation and biology, were thought by some to be more humane, collaborative, inclusive, peaceful, nurturing, democratic, and holistic in their approach to problem solving than men. So, everything is a stereotype. Everything that concerns women is a stereotype, so also anything that concerns nature. Catherine Miles, in the Encyclopedia Britannica, mentions that it was in this phase in 1974 that the French feminist François d'Ibonie coined the term ecofeminism. The term was coined to capture the sense that because of their biological connection to Earth and lunar cycles, women were natural advocates of environmentalism. Today, ecofeminism and theories connected with it have progressed and focus on the practical issues faced by the 20th century, where we need to look beyond theory and we need to involve ourselves in dynamics of restoring global harmony in the face of impending peril to Earth's life. It is pertinent here to look at the feminist movement and to reiterate what the high priest of the movement, Simone de Beauvoir, has stated in this connection in the second sex. And she writes, "Man seeks in woman the other as nature and as his well-being. But we know what ambivalent feelings nature inspires in man. He exploits her, but she crushes him. He is born of her and dies in her. And she is the source of his being and the realm that he subjugates to his will. Nature is a vein of gross material in which the soul is imprisoned. And she is the supreme reality. She is contingence and idea, the finite and the whole. She is what opposes the spirit and the spirit itself. She is the spirit itself and she opposes the spirit. Therefore, woman and nature are both incessant reminders of man's mortality. Man cannot think of himself without thinking about woman and nature because he is born of her and he will drive him. He exploits her, but she crushes him. So when man is exploiting nature, nature crushes him. And we as Indians have this plentifully available in our mythology. What about Kali? What about Durga? So this is where nature and woman are interconnected, or they can be seen as the same. And naturally, when they are not of use, they are othered. They are always othered. When we think of ecology, we are curious about nature. So, what do we think? When we think of ecology, we are curious about nature. What is it? What is our relationship to it? So the word nature in our vocabulary implies our assumption of a fundamental separation or intentional distinction from it. We are either fundamentally separate from nature or we are distinct, and that distinction is intentional, not natural. Nature is a human idea, something transcendental in material mass, signifying that it is non-civilized. It is a label for those places that man perceives as being qualitatively apart from civilized places. It is the other. Nature becomes, on one level, a passive habitat, meaningless in and of itself. It means the trees, the oceans, the mountains, the sunlight, etc., but never has a meaning of its own. It is open to exploitation at the will and the whim of humans. Since the present society is built on the premise that humanity must dominate nature for its development, so you see, humans exploit nature at their whim and fancy. Susan Griffin graphically describes the perilous situation. She tells us that we who are born into this civilization have inherited a habit of mind. We are divided against ourselves. We no longer feel ourselves to be a part of this earth. We grow used to ignoring the evidence of our own experience, what we hear or see, what we feel in our own bodies. In some places, the sky is perpetually gray, and the air is filled with putrid smell. Forests we loved as children disappear. The waters we once swam are forbidden to us now because they are poisoned. We remember that there was a sweet taste to fruit, there used to be more birds, but we do not read these perceptions as signs of our own peril. We live in such delusion that we pretend ignorance of these facts and need environmentalists and ecologists to remind us of the impending peril. Our own Mahanadi is drying, Katachuri is drying, all the rivers in Odisha are drying. There are cyclones and droughts, innumerable, small and big, devastating our country, our state, and yet we do not think that, we are not aware of the peril. We forget this, we ignore these. We require the government to tell us. We require the eco-critics to tell us. But we are not conscious of these things. Griffin rightly says that we have given ourselves up long ago. We have accepted defeat. We have just fallen into some kind of grove that the patriarchal society has dictated. So we are just in that groove, and then we are a part of a kind of mad stream of progress, but we do not remind ourselves. Okay, we are living in a fool's paradise, says Susan Griffin, an important eco-critic. In the lust for power over others, we do not know of our own existence. We always lust for power, and that power is always over others. That power is domination. So when we want to dominate others, we forget about our own existence. So she says, now, if we are dying by increments, we have ceased to be aware of this death. Now, what is happening in the pandemic? We are gradually accepting it. We are accepting death. We will not rectify ourselves. We will not do anything to change the situation. Rather, we have just ceased, like Griffin says, that we have ceased to be aware of this death. By displacing natives and indigenous people from their original homes in order to grab the natural resources of those places, which have been going on for centuries. Now, this exploitation for natural resources has been going on for centuries, and this results in annihilation of cultures of the world, rendering people homeless and hungry and creating a revengeful attitude. So naturally, if you grab somebody's home, land, livelihood, they become angry and they become revengeful. So violence and terrorism are born. This may sound very poetic, but this is what happens when we have industrialization. This is what happens to the land of the indigenous people, to the fertile land, because we want more industry. We want more things. So this may sound poetic, but there are plentiful cases in point. So one point could be the annihilation of the Greater Andamanese tribe. We no longer have the Greater Andamanese tribe. We no longer have the Nicobarese people, right? Because the British started the exploitation and we continued it from the mainland. So they concocted, they just got all kinds of diseases from us. And then, they are no longer alive. We annihilated tribes. So here in Odisha, as a case in point, the displacement of the Dongriya Kondas, natives of the hills of Niyamgiri in Odisha for mining bauxite in the area by the industrial giant Vedanta can be cited. I just showed you the Vedanta industrial site. So Survival International, an NGO, has documented in their website the struggle for survival and justice by the natives of these hills. The Niyamgiri hills in Odisha are bauxite-capped and soak up the monsoon's rain, giving rise to more than 100 perennial streams and rivers, including the Vansadhara River. These streams provide the water that is vital for the communities who live in the hills and provide critical drinking and irrigation water for those in the plains, and also for whom drought and starvation have now become commonplace. So these tribal people have now accepted that drought and starvation are a way of life. The Vansadhara provides drinking and irrigation water to millions of people in the area, right, in the states of Odisha and Andhra Pradesh. Over centuries, the Dongriya Kondas have helped to maintain the rich biodiversities of their forest, which is home to tigers, leopards, giant squirrels, and sloth bears. The Dongriya Kond have no overarching political or religious leader. So the clans and villages have their own leaders and individuals with specific ceremonial functions, and which include the Beju and the Bejuni, the male and the female priests. The Dongriya believe that the animals, plants, and mountains and other specific sites and streams have a life force, a soul, which is called Jela and which comes from the mother goddess. For them, there is no distinction between the self and the other. They live in perfect harmony with their ecological environment. So ravaging of their mountains for bauxite would result in gross health and environmental hazards. So now you can see here is a mountain where the Dongriyas live, and the occupied space by the Vedanta. Look at the difference, look at the greenery here, and look at the waste of the land that is formed by the Vedanta. In this case, let us look at Africa. So this is how the soil of Lanjigad has become. Now let us look at Kenya. As another example, we could look at the desertification in Kenya caused by random deforestation. Again, the desert was caused by random deforestation, which could be eventually reversed. You see, nothing is permanent. Nature always, because nature is the nurturer, nature always gives us a scope, a chance to reverse what we have done, if not completely, in parts. So, you see, this was eventually reversed by the Green Belt movement caused by a group of poor women. Now, again, you see, it is women who are connected with nature and who are instrumental in reversing the damage done. So, these women were led by Wangari Maathai in 1970. So, Professor Wangari Maathai later won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2004. The Green Belt movement focused on planting trees, environmental conservation, and women's rights. So, women's rights are always connected to environmental rights. This is Wangari Maathai. Maathai suggested to the rural women that they plant trees for firewood and to stop soil erosion. So the primary thing was that these women could plant trees so that they would get firewood and also at the same time stop soil erosion. This action grew into a nationwide movement to safeguard the environment, defend human rights, and fight governmental injustice. The goals of the Green Belt movement were well defined. It had 4 basic goals. So, what were the 4 basic goals? 1, to strengthen and expand the Green Belt movement in Kenya. 2, to share its program with other countries across the world. 3, to empower women and girls